Holly pot bushes in Governor Dandy. The Maryhill mansions are made up of candy. Parkhead's flying saucers are ever so handy. Is that not a lovely surprise? Glasgow, stirring and shaking us, Glasgow, never forsaking us, Glasgow. You keep on taking us time after time by surprise. In Partick the polis keep bees in their lockers. The Glasgow's the lions are wonderful talkers. The Shettleston grannies are all tightrope walkers. Is that not a lovely surprise? Glasgow, stirring and shaking us, Glasgow, never forsaking us, Glasgow. You keep on taking us time after time by surprise. In Gorbals folk dress in bin bags, they look smartin'. In Pollock folk sing till they're heard in Dumbarton. The lambs in Lambhill grow their wool in Stuart tartan. Is that not a lovely surprise? Glasgow, stirring and shaking us, Glasgow, never forsaking us, Glasgow. You keep on taking us time after time by surprise.
You're what? That's what King Loth shouted to his daughter, Princess Thenyu, one angry night in the late 6th century. King Loth was a ruler of all the lands of Lothian around here. And as you'll have guessed, he just could not believe his ears when his daughter, Princess Thenyu, had said to him, "I'm pregnant." Was he surprised? Now, the king couldn't have guessed it, the princess couldn't have guessed it, and indeed her mystery lover couldn't have guessed it. But when those two young people had engaged in the age-old pastime of procreation, they had begun not just the making of a child, but, and here's the surprise, the making of a city. Here's what happened. The king was in a right tantrum, and he said to some of his heavy boys, "Take that bitch to the top of yon cliff and chip her over." And they did. But by a miracle, she survived. And then he told his heavy boys to send her off on a voyage. So they brought her down here to the shore, tied her in a coracle, that's a little round boat, and then floated her off over the dark waters of the Firth of Forth to be washed up on the other side, away over yonder. Here in Chorus, the kindly Saint Servanus, Serf for short, and his monks lived in the wee monastery up the hill there. Now, in this particular morning, they were down on the shore doing what they did most mornings, raking among the rocks for sea coal to keep the home fires burning. Imagine their surprise when this wee coracle bumps up in the pebbles right beside them. But faster than it takes to shout, "Holy smoke!" the monks lifted the exhausted lass from the coracle and wheeshed her up to the monastery, where, in due course, she gave birth to her son, whom St. Serf christened Kentigern, but nicknamed Mungo, which means best friend. The old monastery disappeared long, long ago, but the story of Princess Thenyu and her wee wain is remembered in the stained glass of Chorus Abbey. Mungo grew to manhood in the old monastery. He was St. Serf's favourite pupil, highly intelligent, well-educated, God-fearing. But since he had acquired the habit of performing the odd wee miracle now and again, his colleagues came to regard him as a bit of a smartass. Their jealousy finally drove him from the monastery, and he and his friends bade their farewells and headed westward. Near Stirling, he came upon the good and ancient St. Fergus, just about ready to depart this life. And Fergus said to him, "Son, take me on this new cart, pulled by these two untamed bulls, and let them wander westward. And wherever they stop of their own accord, I want you to bury me there, and make that the dwelling place for you and your followers." Mungo followed the bulls, and they led him by this Hoggenfield Loch, and along a burn which flowed out of the loch, the Mollendiner, and he caught salmon in it for his dinner. Finally, the bulls stopped on this dear green hill. Yes, and Glasgow Cathedral is built on it now. And the Mollendiner sparkled at its foot. But the Mollendiner has gone forever, you say? Surprise, surprise, it hasn't, you know. Behold, Black Hill's #1 tourist attraction. The Mollendiner waterfall. Well, sometimes water splashes over it. Can't you just imagine Saint Mungo guddling a big salmon in the pool here? Well, maybe you can't. Pity the historic burn has been turned into a rubbish dump here, and further on it becomes a sewer. But when Mungo and his monks were here, the Clyde and the Mollendiner were chock full of salmon. The monks didn't have to fish for them. They just whistled, and the big beauties jumped right out of the burn into their arms. They were sick eating the stuff. In fact, some people say that it was Mungo's monks who coined the phrase holy mackerel, because they wished they could get some mackerel just for a change. I'm off. Who's for a fish supper? Mungo buried St. Fergus on this hill, waiting, of course, until the old man had died. So Mungo set up his church and community in this place. Imagine the scene. A cluster of wee wooden huts across a grassy hilltop, and the salmon cooking away on a smoky fire. Can you picture the saintly man standing just about here and gazing away out yonder into the future and thinking to himself, I can feel a city coming on, an uncommon city, my city, home for a constantly renewable collection of the human race which will spend much of its time taking the rest of the world by surprise. The show was on the road. It took 900 years before they got rid of the wee wooden huts and replaced them with this big kit that we see here now. Oh, and by the way, I should tell you, eventually the place got called Glasgow. Oh, but please, let's dodge the arguments about what the name means. Let's just go and get surprised. And here's a wee starter. Where else would you find a great cathedral like Glasgow Cathedral and a great infirmary like the Royal Infirmary breathing down each other's necks? Look, they're nearly bumping into each other. And there's a clash of interests. The staff of the cathedral are always hoping to get people into heaven, while the staff of the infirmary are always trying to keep people out of heaven. Some people have turned curly-headed with the surprises that have hit them in this cathedral. But niggling at the back of my mind is a tale about a man, an Italian guy, I think. And he took Glasgow by surprise. and even indeed took innocent visitors to the cathedral by surprise. Now, what was his name?
My name is Vincenzo Lunardi. Oh, I well remember my visit to Glasgow in November 1785. Of course, my fame had come to the city before me, and Glasgow loved me, especially the Glasgow ladies, huh? You have not heard of me? How preposterous! Vincenzo Lunardi lifted the dreams of the people of Europe sky high as I floated away above them in my hydrogen balloon. But some folk thought I was an angelic messenger from heaven, and when I landed, they dropped on their knees and made the most outrageous confessions to me. I was the darling of my time. Ladies had their hats made in the shape of my balloon. They called them, of course, Lunardis. I flew my balloon from Glasgow Green to Selkirk in 2 hours. Huh? Try doing that in your Alfa Romeo on Fair Saturday. As you would say, no chance.
No chance.
Well, cynics, of course, say that it is the preachers in places of worship who produce the gas. But I took my gas to this Glasgow cathedral. Fear not, it was inside my balloon at the time. And would you believe, for a few days before my flight, they let me float my balloon in the cathedral choir. There, my great balloon gently swayed under the rafters, with throngs of Glasgow people fighting each other to get in to see this modern marvel, even although I was charging them a shilling each to enter. Imagine how thrilled I was when one young lady cried to me, "Take me to the stars!" But I was rather put out later to discover she had not meant floating skywards with me, but was asking me to take her to some hostelry down High Street called Stars. My friend, arrivederci. I must fly.
Well, you heard what the man said. Cricky Jenkins. His balloon has floated back in again. There is no record of whether it rained on Glasgow Green that day that Lunardi flew off in his balloon towards Selkirk. If it had, then the ladies would only have had their parasols for protection. But had they been able to wait another 39 years, a fellow who lies in this graveyard could have offered them much better protection. This chemist discovered that round about 1818, the chemical works for producing more and more ammonia. And when he changed ammonia into naphtha, it dissolved rubber. And here's the surprise. When he applied this new solution to ordinary cloth, he made it permanently waterproof. And by 1824, he was producing his Macintosh raincoats. From then on, everybody could pack a Mac. Charles Macintosh lies here. And he couldn't care less whether it rains or not. Talk about surprises. Here I was soaking up the atmosphere of this great cathedral, when suddenly this superior West End lady hit me with this question.
Do you know where our Coccinella Day is?
And I said, well, perhaps you signed for Manchester United. And she said, don't be ridiculous. And then she said,
Let me broaden your obviously limited knowledge by telling you that a Coccinella Day is a ladybird. Yes, a ladybird. And our cathedral is the only one in the land to have its very own ladybird. Now, don't you move from that spot, my man, till I show you exactly how we acquired our ladybird. One morning in 1943, Commander Alistair Montgomery was patrolling with his motor torpedo boat in the North Sea between Yarmouth and the Dutch coast. You see, war was on then. The commander was such a nice chap, well educated, from a good family, lived in Sarn, down Ayrshire way. Anyway, there had been some air action, and the crew of the MTB, that's short for motor torpedo boat, yes, the crew had rescued 2 German airmen. Now, shortly afterwards, The commander and his officers were studying charts in the chart room, a very good place to study charts, of course. Well, when suddenly a ladybird landed on the very chart that they were looking at. Well, one officer was about to swipe the dear little thing when another officer yelled, "No, no, 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 stop. For goodness sake, never kill a ladybird. We'll have disgustingly bad luck if you do that." So the fool put his hand back in his pocket, and the ladybird survived. But the next thing they knew, German armed trawlers were attacking the MTB. Shells were popping all around them. The petrol tanks were ablaze, and all in all, it was a most unhappy interlude. But Commander Montgomery managed to get his boat back to base with all of his crew safe and sound. Now, was that not a miracle? And the German airmen survived as well. Wasn't it just a blessing that the officer hadn't scalped the poor wee ladybird? Now, this elegant chair here was unveiled in the early 1960s by the Queen Mother. It's a memorial to all the men of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve who were lost in the war. And you'll maybe understand why Commander Montgomery at that time insisted on a ladybird being carved somewhere on the chair. Now, would you just look up there? Here. It's Glasgow's smallest memorial. Now, feel free, my man, to proceed with the rest of your visit.
And I thought to myself, that bird is some lady. But have I not seen her somewhere before? Some folk will tell you that the tail on that bronze horse up there actually moves. And the figure sitting astride it is, of course, King William III of Great Britain, known affectionately as King Billy, sometimes not affectionately. Now, horse and rider stood down at Glasgow Cross for nearly 200 years. And you know, there were revellers who would tell you that when they brought in the new year down there, they actually saw horse and rider jump down off the pedestal right on the stroke of midnight Hogmanay. The king would gallop his horse right down Salt Market to the Clyde, allow the horse to get a drink, gallop back up again, jump up on the pedestal, and they would be motionless for another year, except for the tail, they said. Now, horse and king were moved up here to Castle Street in 1923 because the poor horse was fed up having empty whisky bottles smashed in his backside down there every new year. Who now among casual passers-by would guess that on this quite unremarkable corner of George Street and Montrose Street, a king got the surprise of his life? The occasion was the laying of the foundation stone for the new Royal Technical College, which is now part of Strathclyde University. A splendiferous gathering spread itself round this corner on the 14th of May 1903. All Glasgow's high Hegians and surrounding gentry. King Edward VII was to perform the honours. Oh, and there was a circle of proud workmen dressed in their best clean overalls here to see the ceremony. My dad was one of them. That's why I know what happened. The stone was suspended from a block and tackle, while the gaffer mason spread the bed of mortar on which it would be set. At a signal, the stone was slowly lowered onto its bed. The king raised his silver trowel, tapped the stone on the four corners and said, "I declare the stone well and truly laid." In a flash, the gaffer mason roared, "Nah, Mr. King, it's a touch low in this back corner. Up with it, lads." And the dutiful squad hauled the stone back into the air. History stood still. The king gasped. The mortar bed was corrected, and the stone was laid back down, dead level. Hooray! But a gaffer mason had actually contradicted a king. Now, if I were to throw a haggis from this corner where a king was embarrassed, it would probably reach the Copthorne Hotel. No, don't try it. Don't waste a haggis. This Copthorne Hotel began life as the North British Railway Hotel. Would you believe that a quotation from the Bible, spoken in one of the rooms of this great hostelry, changed the course of history? In January 1941, when Britain's fortunes in the Second World War were at a low ebb, 3 men and their personal staffs met for dinner in room 21. They were Winston Churchill, Tom Johnston, who was then Secretary of State for Scotland, and Harry Hopkins, the United States envoy. Hopkins had been sent over especially by President Roosevelt to check the atmosphere in Britain. Was a mood of defeatism going to crush this country? In such a situation, could the United States risk putting their full weight behind the British war effort? Churchill and Johnson were hoping to convince Hopkins that Britain was coming off the ropes, fighting mad and unbeatable. They were asking Uncle Sam to give us the big, beautiful backup. Conversation over dinner in room 21 was friendly and funny. All 3 statesmen were good at it. As dinner ended, Harry Hopkins announced that he wanted to get up and make a little speech. A round of applause egged him on to do just that. As the American rose to his feet, Churchill and Johnson wondered if they would hear if America were going to tiptoe away and leave us, or if Uncle Sam would shout, "Hi, buddies, we're with you all the way." Their breath was as bated as it could be. Harry began in quiet tone, slowly building up, and then with a little tremor in his voice, giving just a hint of sincere passion, he quoted Ruth, speaking to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Ruth, chapter 1, verse 16.
For whither thou goest, I will go. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. For thy people are my people, and thy God, my God.
This coded message wrapped itself round Churchill's palpitating heart like a hot water bottle. He knew then that the United States was coming alongside Britain, and from then on, the war would be a whole new ball game. Aha, out yonder, there's a statue of William Ewart Gladstone. I do believe he would be cocking an ear over here on that historic evening, wondering what was going on. As a young fellow in a shooting party one time, a gun exploded and blew off the index finger of his left hand. Now, when Hamo Thornycroft, the sculptor, came to produce this statue, he felt he couldn't show the great man without a finger. And so he arranged for him to be holding a book. And the missing finger is actually keeping his place in the book. Glasgow, like every other big city, has had some spectacular fires in its time, and great feats of courage have been performed by Glasgow firemen. And while we boys nowadays may want to be brain surgeons or airline pilots, years ago, lots of laddies wanted to be firemen. But in 1894, a Glasgow dog sprang a surprise by demanding to be a fireman. Wallace, that was his name, ran away from home, rushed into the College Street fire station and refused to leave. And here is Wallace. And no inducement would encourage that dog to go back home again. The owner finally gave up and left in tears. And so Wallace became a permanent member of the fire brigade. And he used to run out ahead of the leading appliance when the brigade were going to a fire. But The uncanny thing about Wallace was that out there in front, he seemed to know where the fire was and led the brigade right to the blaze. How did the dog know? That's been a burning question ever since. Now, running on the Glasgow cobbles made his paws pretty sore, so an admirer had some leather boots made for him, but Wallace prepared naked paws, and he kicked them off. He died in 1902 and was stuffed and put in this case. And now, Wallace still inspires the Glasgow firemen. And they do say that when the bell rings, his nose still twitches. We've talked about one Wallace in Glasgow. Let's talk about another. Sir William Wallace, Guardian of Scotland, who fought so many battles for his country's freedom. On the 3rd of August 1305, he was asleep in a house here, near Rob Royston, on the edge of the city. He was tired and pretty defenceless. Suddenly, he was surprised by Sir John Monteith and 60 men there to capture Scotland's hero. They took him to a ghastly fate in London. This memorial is to that sad morning. Oh, but wait a minute. There's someone here back to pay tribute to the great warrior. Back remembering Braveheart. Oh no, it couldn't be. But it is. It's Mel Gibson. Hello, Mel.
Don't hello Mel me. My name is Reid, James Reid, otherwise known as Jiminy. And I reckon what Big Will needed when Sir John Monteith and his men came to capture him here was a streetwise shop steward, somebody like myself. Now if I'd been here, I would have negotiated Sir John into a fankle. I'd have said to his men, working overtime, you can pay the overtime rates. I would have had him out on strike before you could say, up the union. And I tell you, Monteith would have been scarpering for his life with his scabbard between his legs. I reckon it could have changed the course of history. If I'd been here, it would have, you know.
And they would have, you know. For in the world come the great hordes of strangers. Through deserts and jungles they'd face ony dangers. They'd gie their right arms to see Celtic and Rangers. Is that no a lovely surprise? Ibrox Stadium, home of Glasgow Rangers, one of the world's great sporting arenas. And apart from football, other top sports have been on show here. I saw Jim Watt defending his world boxing title here. And back in the glorious days of the Rangers sports, I saw the great Dutch women's sprinter, Olympic champion Fanny Blankers-Koen, flashing up this track here. And Sydney Wooderson, world mile record holder. And I saw Alan Patterson, the Scottish high jumper, jumping a new British all-comers record of 6 feet 7.5 inches over in that corner back in August 1946. But picture the football greats who have come onto this historic rectangle of grass, having crossed this track and out of that tunnel. Jimmy McGrory, George Young, Charlie Tully, John Gregg, Paul McStay, Alan McCoist and Gaza. But hold on. Here's a surprising surprise. Emerging from the tunnel at this very moment are Glasgow's most famous Celtic supporter and Glasgow's most famous Rangers supporter.
Andy, it was never a penalty all the same.
Come on, Cardinal, the man had the ball up his duke nearly. It had to be a penalty.
Cardinal winning, Andy Cameron, what are you two doing here?
Jimmy, that's a private conversation. Are we go and run round the track? For
Well, I always wanted to do that. I always wanted to be in the Ranger sport.
Aye. Well, you followed Celtic all your life. There must have been a Rangers player that you would like to have taken to Parkhead.
My man would be Willie Waddle.
Oh.
He came from the Forth. I'm from Wishaw, and I saw him play against our school in the final of the Scottish Secondary School Shield, and then he went to Rangers. So I think I would like to have seen him in a green and white strip.
My favourite all-time Celtic player, if I had a choice to bring to Ibrox, would have been a neighbour of mine from Rutherglen, Bobby Murdoch, who actually went to the same school as you at a different time, Ladies High, and he played along with Billy McNeil at school as well. But I remember Bobby as an 8-year-old playing against 12-year-olds, and he was just outstanding. He was a great player.
Yeah, I've heard people who knew the Lisbon Lions well who said Murdoch the best.
Aye, I thought so. He was a sort of linchpin, you know, great player. Anyway, are you ready for the greatest old firm encounter of all time? I came to keep you up.
Lead on, Cameron.
That's enough. We'll call it a draw, nothing each. I think Tommy Burns and Walter Smith would tell us to keep it up with our own jobs.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, it's been a pleasure playing with you. So much so, I'm going to give you the esteemed honour of my Ranger scarf on your neck. There you are.
Thank you very much, Andy, and I think I would like to offer you.
You'll need to tell me about this, but don't pull it too tight now. Here, we're giving Biggie to a bad name.
We are indeed, Andy, and that's what it deserves.
You're right.
This scene has caused roars that are simply atomic. The cheers and the singing are quite metronomic. The Cardinal kicking a ball with the comic. Is that no a lovely surprise? Sauchiehall Street, one of the world's most famous thoroughfares. Sauchiehall means the way of the willows, and that is how the Willow Tea Room got its name. Isn't this the very essence of Glasgow gentility? It really is an oasis of stylish living, away from the rough and readiness of the big city.
Right, are you going to order before the milk turns sour?
Oh yes, waiters, a pot of tea, please.
Right. You want a fairy cake?
Oh, aye.
Ah, well, that's name. I'll give you a name. Biscuit.
They say that there are no tea rooms anywhere else in the world like the Glasgow tea rooms. Even the tea has its own special flavour. They say it's the water that does it. Oh, here she's back again. That was quick. That's service.
Didn't he keep you waiting there,
Oh,
did he?
no.
Oh. Right, there's your pie and biscuit. And would you want your tea poured?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Wonderful service.
Oh, it's always very good service here at the Willow Tea Rooms. I'll just I'll just have a wee cup myself. Nobody's looking. Well, I'm stunning anyway, you know. You know, it was Glasgow that invented the first tea room.
Really?
Oh, yes. Way back at the turn of the century. Well, you see, there were places that families could go into at a time when Glasgow was hardly ever sober. Bevying, that was the pastime, you know what I'm saying? Right. So, of course, the temperance societies, they were delighted when Miss Cranston opened her tea rooms. Well, it meant that wives could force cups of tea into their men's hands to replace the glasses of whisky in the pint measures. And of course, it became fashionable to visit the tea rooms. When you did, it was a sign that you weren't common, or nothing like that, you know. It was Glaswegians that invented that special method of holding the teacup. You know, like this. Right. You know, the wee pinky stuck up in the air. Of course, the Willow tea rooms became the last word in elegance. And Kate Cranston, she got that famous architect Charles Rennie Mackintosh. You know who I mean? Aye. Well, to design the place, I mean, just look round here. Look at it, it's deluxe, deluxe. Oh, aye. Do you know, she even got them to design the cutlery. Of course, you know, I always think that... Here, listen, did you ask me to sit down here? What's your game? I could get my books for this, you know. Oh, I've met your type afore. Cheeky big thingy.
Have I not seen her somewhere already? Glasgow's most famous coffee rooms stood near Glasgow Cross. The building began life as a town hall in 1740. It was changed to the Tontine Hotel and Coffee Rooms in 1783. The tobacco lords used to strut up and down here on the pavement in front of the rooms. The pavement was in an arcade arrangement with 10 arched openings facing onto Trongate. The interesting features of the Tontine building were the keystones of the arches, for each had a grotesque face carved upon it. And these Tontine faces became internationally famous. People came from all the earths and perts to see them. But when the building was demolished in the 1860s, the Tontine faces disappeared. After the Second World War, some good detective work by interested people recovered the faces, and they're preserved here at the Proven Lordship. Now, look at these faces. As your eye moves along the line, the faces get more grotesque. Mungo Naismith was a sculptor, but what magic spirit guided his hand so that he carved in one of those keystones the face of a famous Hollywood film star, some 200 years before the star was born? Behold, the face of the star of Stagecoach and True Grit, John Wayne.
The hell you will.
And here's another wee surprise. In 1894, the architects Forrest Salmon were asked to design and build new headquarters for the Scottish Temperance League, and they did. Here it is, the tall, narrow sandstone building in Hope Street, just about facing Bothwell Street. Now, they were also asked to put on it some uplifting type statues, and they did. But the most interesting one is the one right on the apex. That's a replica of Michelangelo's David, which enhances the city of Florence in Italy. But David in Florence, he's standing there bare scuddy. Now, I'm not going to say one way or the other whether the architects, for reasons of modesty or the Scottish climate, did or did not decide to dress this replica in something like boxer shorts. You'll just have to stand here with your binoculars, but do try and avoid tripping over the curb. An architect called Forsyth went suddenly mad in 1876 when Willie White asked him to design and build a clay pipe factory here in Bain Street. Most of Glasgow was built in honey-coloured sandstone, but Forsyth chose red and white bricks here in a sort of daft French Renaissance design. Willie White loved it. Of course, the Whites had been making clay pipes for years and years up in the Dove Hill off the Gallowgate, and exporting them all over the world. Would you believe that the United States cavalry puffed its way across the prairies, with each man having a White's pipe clenched in his teeth? And it is probable that poor General George Custer soaked his last sook on a White's pipe before Sitting Bull's Redskins slaughtered George and most of his men at the Little Bighorn in Montana. And that was at the very time when this factory was being built. There's irony for you. The People's Palace has a collection of White's clay pipes. And you know, the men and women of yesteryear, they used to make what they called jaw warmers. And they snapped the stem off just about there. And then, of course, the bowl sat snugly against the jaw. It was great on a frosty morning. And of course, Popeye agrees. While we're in the People's Palace, we can glimpse at something which high society in Glasgow in the 18th century just didn't talk about. John Glassford of Dougalston was one of the wealthiest of the great tobacco lords who strutted the Plainstanes in Trungate in the late 18th century. But John, a God-fearing man, agreed with the rest of the tobacco lords that their workers in the southern states of America on the plantations should really be respected and treated with Christian kindness. But look what we find in John's family portrait. If you look on the edge of the picture, just above John's chair, you can just see the dim outline of the little Negro boy whom John brought across from the States to be a uniformed servant. But by this time, the anti-slavery lobby was building up, and this portrait became quite an embarrassment to John. So he had the little Negro boy painted out, but he wasn't very successful, was he? We can still see the little fellow. I hope you'll be suitably surprised to learn that the great industrial revolution which swept through Britain in the late 18th and early 19th century started right here on Glasgow Green on a fine Sunday afternoon in 1765. James Watt, a man of many talents, had been messing about with steam engines for quite a long while, and other people were messing about with them too, but they were quite impractical. The water that was made from the condensing steam drowned the engines, and they were as useful as a chocolate teapot. That condensing steam had to be got rid of.
I had gone to take a walk on a fine Sabbath afternoon early in 1765. I had entered the green by the gate at the foot of Charlotte Street and had passed the old washing house. I was thinking upon the engine at the time and had passed the Herd's house when the thought came into my head that as steam was an elastic body, it would rush into a vacuum, and if a communication could be made between the cylinder and an exhausted vessel, it would rush into it. The steam would condense without cooling the cylinder. I hadn't walked further than the golf house when the whole thing was arranged in my mind.
Bingo! The answer was the separate condenser. In a moment, dream became reality, and the Industrial Revolution was on its way, and it happened right here. Glasgow has always been Dance City. There have always been more places for jigging in Glasgow than anywhere else in the whole of Britain. And in the 30s and 40s, it had its own exclusive dance phenomenon. Danced nowhere else in the world, and only for the experts. It was called the Burler Zone. And then came the Big Apple, and jitterbugging, and jiving, and the twist, and disco dancing, and line dancing. But I'll tell you what, let's rerun some of those years. Okay, clear the floor. Gentlemen, take your partners for the Burler Zone. Whew. Dancing makes you hungry and thirsty. And you know, Glasgow has always said to strangers from all over the world, come in and make yourself at home. And that welcome has paid off, because those people have brought with them their native cultures and cooking and their native bevy. Indians, Italians, Chinese, Irish, and they have got rid of Glasgow's mince and totty image. Glasgow now has an international cuisine. And the marvellous thing is that those people who have brought their food and their drink to us to tickle our taste buds are now belonging to Glasgow.
I belong to Glasgow, dear old Glasgow town.
There's nothing the matter with Glasgow, for it's going round and round.
I hardly come on a working gang, as anywhere can see. But if I get a couple of drinks on a Saturday, Glasgow belongs to me.
Some surprising people have belonged to Glasgow. Stan Laurel, the mate of Oliver Hardy, he belonged to Glasgow for a while when his dad was the manager of the Scotia Theatre in Stockwell Street. The Scotia became the Metropole. Stan began his show business career in the early years of the century at the Argyll Street Panopticon Theatre. A.E. Pickard, he was a great Glasgow eccentric who had bought the old Britannia Theatre and he renamed it the Panopticon. Now, Arthur Jefferson, who was Stan's dad, he said, "You will not go on the stage." So Stan, he came up to this theatre here, the Panopticon, and begged Pickard to let him do his act. Pickard agreed.
Molly dear, listen here, I'm afraid to go home in the dark. Every day the papers say there's a robber right in the park. I sit all alone in the YMCA, singing just like a lark. Oh, there's no place like home, but I'm afraid to go home in the dark. Yes, there's no place like home, but I'm afraid to go home and afraid to go home and afraid to go home in the dark.
And the rest, as they say, is history. While Stan Laurel was performing inside the theatre, another odd Glaswegian was performing outside on the pavement. He was Alexandra Wiley-Petrie, the loudmouthed critic of the Glasgow councillors and the Glasgow police. And he published all his complaints in his own newspaper, The Clincher. And he eventually became known as The Clincher. Do you know, at one time he was taken into an asylum, but they released him after a while and gave him a certificate proving his sanity. Indeed, he claimed to be the only man in Glasgow who had been certified sane. He sold his newspapers along here. Holy jinx, the Clincher's back.
Read all about it.
Most people are surprised and shocked to learn that the author of Wee Willie Winkie is buried here in an unmarked grave in Tollcross Cemetery. Yes, Willie Miller, the Glasgow cabinet maker, who wrote the lullaby that has sent generations of Waynes to sleep all over the world, was laid to rest here in 1872. But who remembers? Yes, he is remembered here by this wee memorial in the necropolis. And it's ironic to think that the vandals who have since bashed it about a bit were once Waynes who maybe went to sleep with their mums singing Wee Willie Winkie. But Wee Willie Winkie will outlive the vandals because People hereabouts do say that sometimes, as the gloaming is settling over the necropolis in the cathedral square, the elf-like figure of Wee Willie Winkie can be seen dancing over the Bridge of Sighs into Cathedral Square as young voices sing his lullaby.
Wee Willie Winkie runs through the town, upstairs and downstairs in his nightgown, twirling at the windy, crying through the lock, are all the bairnies in their bed, it's past 8 o'clock.
Good night, Glasgow. Please, no more surprises. At least, not until tomorrow. Good night.